So good morning. My name is Jody Lane, and Mike asked me before he, it was a while back, he said, would you be interested in helping me with this particular presentation talk we're going to do today? I am a transplant to Bartlesville. We arrived here about 10 years ago, I think, and time flies. We escaped Houston, which if you want to talk about trauma, I would put Houston maybe in that category. So Bartlesville is just a really nice, pleasant place to be, and we've thoroughly enjoyed the time we've been here. I decided, just really quick about me, since y'all haven't had a chance probably to get to know me or meet me or even see me. About the time our fourth child was in high school, I had always wanted to do something different and something else after they were all gone. And so I started thinking, well, what is it that I can, what kind of work would I like to be doing? And I started thinking about, what people said. Oh, you're good at this, or oh, you seem to enjoy that. I started looking at interest and maybe talents. I started taking some of those little personality tests online, and then I started thinking, okay, so I got to factor something else in, my age, and the fact that my hair is going silver/gray, and what's something that I can be doing that it doesn't matter the wrinkles, it doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter the appearance so much, but something that actually seems to work with this stage of life. And I thought, oh, maybe counseling. So I ended up going back to school, getting a graduate degree, and I'm a licensed counselor. Work here in town at a practice that's also an agency, and just have thoroughly enjoyed it, and also been really challenged. So I've been there about 8 years. So that's one of the reasons that Mike asked me to fill in today, is that I've done work, right now primarily I've worked with adults, anywhere from, over the past few years, I've worked with anyone, the children especially in the beginning, but now progressed to a place where I'm working with probably 16-year-olds on up to 80-year-olds, and in areas just across the map. All of us have stuff. All of us have gone through hard stuff, and there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The world that we live in is not the Garden of Eden. And I remember it was at a church retreat, actually, probably 20 years ago, that I think it was actually a counselor that was given, kind of heading up the retreat. And that's exactly what she said. She said, our bodies were designed for the Garden of Eden. And after the fall, well, we're in a world that isn't fair, it isn't safe, and it isn't predictable all the time. And it's not easy. And so that's going to have some repercussions. So I'm going to breathe for a second. I was talking to my husband, and I said, okay, so I'm going to be doing this talk today, this presentation. And I said, it's about abuse and trauma. And I said, what would be your advice? And he said, keep it light. And I thought, really? Okay. So those don't go along. I mean, the whole idea of keeping it light along with trauma and abuse, it doesn't exactly jive. But what we're going to focus on today is going to be, more than anything, how we get better, not how we stay stuck if we are. So I need to remember I've got slides. I'm going to go back to this, make sure it's turned on. And the question, why can't you just let it go? Have any of you guys ever had anybody say that to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what do you say?
It's hard to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I say, no, that's not let it go. It's why don't you just leave, or why don't you just let it go? Yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah. And it's hard because, like you said, it's hard to explain. You don't have the words.
Right.
And it's not, it's just hard. You want to let it go, but it's not happening. So there are a lot of times in life where we go through stuff. All of us do. None of us is exempt from just hardship. And so what usually happens is that we feel that pain of what happened, we suffer, we talk to people, we take advantage of the support we've got, we feel everything that we should be feeling, and that naturally as the focus comes with what we went through. And within a certain amount of time, we recover. You know, how long it takes to recover, that sometimes has to do with, again, the amount of support we have, where we are in life, who we are, personalities, you know, how many things are happening at the same time, how much stress. But in general, most of us will recover. We get better, and we're able to look back at what happened, and we say, you know, that was hard. I know it happened. I lived through it. I'm okay. It becomes a memory. We don't have to relive it. And when things come up to remind us of that, yes, it's natural to think about those things, but we're not stuck reliving and feeling everything we did back then. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm gonna start with a theory, which I think is more than a theory, is that we were designed to heal. When our Creator made us, when He started with Adam and Eve, He gave our bodies and our minds and our spirits the capacity for healing. It is going to happen. But sometimes, as I said, we'll get stuck, and we'll go into that a little bit more. But just understanding that I don't know, the miracle of just the workmanship. You go to, I've got Psalm 138 on here. I think, is it 138 or 130? Yeah, 138 or 139, about how we're fearfully and wonderfully made. We'll talk about that as well. And that's the other thing that I'll mention here, and I know it's in my notes, but when I look at people, when I look at myself, we're not just our brain, our mind. We're not just our emotions. We're not just this physical body. We're not just the spiritual part of it. We're not just who we are in the context of our relationships. We are all of that. And when we get hurt, when we go through something really, really hard, when we are going through hard things, through trauma, there's not just one part of us that's affected. It affects everything. You guys get that? Have y'all noticed that in yourselves? Can you give me an example of what it might look like in your own life? Anybody? Yeah.
Depression of it.
Yeah. Did you say depression? Mm-hmm. Yeah, just feeling really low and down and blue. And when you're feeling that way, how does it affect the things that you do? Like,
you just don't give 100%.
Yeah, you're just not all there. You don't give 100%. You're pulled by physically. My goodness, how do you feel depression? I mean, it's not just I know I'm feeling sad and blue, etc., but how does your body feel it?
I think that when we get pushed down from some trauma so much that you get, you get put down so much by maybe as a person, and then it just affects your whole being. You just give up because you don't feel worth it.
Exactly. There's so much, the way we think about ourselves changes.
Right.
When we go through things that are traumatic, in trauma, we'll get to the definition of trauma. Abuse is something that is, I mean, it's trauma. But being traumatized and staying traumatized is something different. But yeah, you're right. I mean, when you get in that place where you can't think really about yourself in the same way because of what you've been through, you can't think about others or about the world. You start to have beliefs either that may or may not be true, but no matter what you do, you can't shake those beliefs that it's my fault, or I can't trust anyone, or this is never going to change. And we can go on and on. But you're right, it affects you on in all of those levels. And then in our relationships, have you noticed what happens? Like you were talking about being depressed, and then you were talking about how just it affects you overall, and it changes some of the things you do and the way you think. How does that affect the relationships that we have with the people around us? Do you notice, there's a pulling back sometimes. We kind of detach. We're afraid to let people know who we are, and then we even the people we really care about, they hurt us because they don't listen, they don't understand. So there's also socially, with the people who could be our biggest sources of support, we're still, we're not reaching out, we're not connecting with them. And those kinds of things that we do whenever we've gone through something that is traumatic for us, it's going to, again, kind of bleed out into all these different areas. So let's say that most things in general, most of us go through things, and you guys, I'm certain, have been through some really hard stuff, but it didn't keep you stuck. You were able to let it go, right? But there are these things that no matter what you do, it just seems like you can't let it go. There's a reason for that. And it goes into just how our whole body was kind of affected by what happened. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you this. Y'all know Beth Moore? Are you familiar with her?
Yeah.
Some of you know her, some of you don't. She recently wrote a book called All My Knotted Up Life. This is a woman, when you look at her, when you listen to her, I mean, she's taught probably millions of people over the past several decades. She's been a Bible teacher. She's living in Houston. She's good old, I thought she was a Texas girl. She's an Arkansas girl, but she has a lot of wisdom. She has written wonderful Bible studies. She looks all put together, but this is a woman who went through a lot of hard stuff. And so I'm just going to go ahead and play. This is a 5 or 6 minute interview with her, which she's going to go into other things besides the trauma. But what I want you to notice is that she has a story, and she's not afraid to tell her story. She didn't tell it all at once. She's alluded to it over the years, has said some things, but with this book, at this point in life, she decided it was just time to tell it. So I want you, as you listen to the interview, just kind of notice, pick up on maybe what helped her come out of the abusive childhood that she experienced. Okay? So hopefully I'm getting this right. You guys know how to do this?
You might have to push play on the laptop.
Or
On the
point it at the laptop. Yeah, just point the remote at the laptop.
Well, what if I touch the laptop?
Yeah, you should. It's a touch screen, you might have to.
It's not a touch, yeah, it's okay. Well, let me back up, go here, and then do that.
Your plugs out the black little box down here.
But it won't. I think that's the mouse on the video.
Okay, anybody else got any ideas, Dennis?
She said if you try to
You
use
just use
your
the
mouse
mouse and point at that red dot on your
on the
laptop.
laptop.
Like use the mouse
This-
pad.
Let's see.
Oh, do it that way. Yes, thank you.
In her latest book, All My Knotted Up Life, Beth Moore delivers a compelling self-portrait filled with unexpected twists and turns, with the final destination being God's enduring love and faithfulness. CBN News sat down with the prominent Christian leader at her Living Proof Ministry headquarters in Houston, Texas. We talked just days after the sudden loss of her brother Wayne, who, along with her other siblings, appear on the cover of her new book.
I just looked up to him and just loved him so, so much. We are reeling, but I had gotten him an advance copy of the memoir, and it just moved me so much to know that he got to see himself through my eyes in those pages.
The title, All My Knotted Up Life, parallels Moore's difficult childhood in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Why did you feel the need to be so vulnerable and so open about?
I've always tried to be transparent in what I shared, but I just get to be a little more specific this time around.
Over the years, Moore has often talked about her childhood sexual abuse. For the first time, she reveals her father as her abuser.
I'm not sure anything impacts the life more than your protector being your perpetrator. In other words, my father was the person on earth that I could trust the least.
Growing up, this secret weighed heavily upon her.
Normally there is a sense of threat. Like, he would not have said, you better not ever tell this. But what he did say over and over was that we had to protect my mom because she was not stable. So he used that. So there was like, I'm going to not only split up my entire family, but I'm going to cause my mother to kill herself.
Moore says her father's active participation in their local church made living with her abuse even harder.
I got to watch him just, prance up and down those aisles and teach his classes and usher, and the confusion of that. The very fact that within those walls, I believed my Sunday school teachers over what I was seeing with authority at home, to me is a testimony of God's grace.
A grace she would need in an even greater way later in life, in her constant struggle with the bad memories.
I definitely had a death wish. Definitely. It seemed to me at several points in my life, this is the only way out.
The Bible teacher also shares about challenges with her husband's mental illness, how it has shaped her marriage of 45 years.
The thing about what Keith had dealt with very severe PTSD and then bipolar, you never knew when there was going to be a sudden episode.
As Moore reflected on those dark days, she saw hope as her anchor.
I never knew what was coming when the sun came up. And neither did he. Neither did he. We had no idea what that day was going to hold. It might be wonderful. It might, before the sun set, it might be frightful. I guess the best thing that has come out of it for me and for us is that you talk about a woman casting herself on Jesus.
While crediting God for holding her family together, Moore quickly points out how therapy also helped with her healing.
Support is a necessity, be it therapists, be it a small group, whatever it is, but there is such a sense of being locked in it anyway that there has to be a way that we are able to be around others and communicate with others.
Moore has also seen her share of controversies. In 2016, she tweeted about the sexual abuse scandal involving then GOP presidential nominee Donald Trump. The backlash from churches was swift. She writes in her memoir, "Daily I received word that my Bible studies were being pulled out of more churches. Some were boxed up and sent back to us. I was told some of them were burned."
It affected me and my family profoundly. The whole face of the ministry changed dramatically.
For years, Moore's teachings had been a feature of the Southern Baptist Convention, the denomination she had been a part of her entire life. It was there that she was baptized and began her love of Scripture. In 2021, she found herself increasingly at odds with SBC leadership over issues ranging from women's roles in ministry, racial justice, and more specifically, its failure to care for sexual abuse victims.
We've been taught somehow that the right thing to do is shelter the abuser, and to the degree that we have somehow distorted such a doctrine of grace that we then are not protecting the abused.
Moore eventually decided to leave.
That was like a death that will probably take me a lifetime for whatever's left to continue to process. These are people I have and do love very much.
Beth, you have demonstrated faithfulness to God, forgiveness, perseverance through all that you've endured. How did you tap into that grace and that strength? And how challenging has it been to minister to people, even when you had personal issues going on in your life?
I can't go back and relive my life. I can't go back and make 1,000 decisions differently, which I wish I could do. I can't rewrite it. It's just what it is. But I can see to it that the grace that the Lord has poured on me is not in vain. That is my hope.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Houston.
No. Okay. So what do y'all take away from that? Any thoughts?
I really liked her last comment. The grace the Lord has poured on me, and I forget what the last part of it was so apparent to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's key, in spite of all that the world or the enemy has tried to destroy us with, the grace the Lord has poured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being able to name all the grace and talk about it and remind herself of that as well, and just hold on to the truth of that grace, the reality of it. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, and in spite of all of that, positive came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't feel very good sometimes, but.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Anything else? Other observations?
She kind of talked about one of the things that we talked about here is why women don't come forward, because she received backlash when she talked out about it. You know, she again became like the person who was at fault.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't rally around her, they kind of shunned her.
Exactly. She took a huge risk. And she suffered some repercussions of it, like you saw with her books being banned or burned and sent back and all that. She heard a lot of hurtful things, and yet she went ahead. She probably anticipates in that she still had the courage to do what she knew was the right thing to do and to stand up. So I just, I want to go ahead and we'll go on and talk a little bit about trauma. I want you just to remember, though, keep in mind, I think what I'd like you to just think about is that she's 66. I mean, she looks great, right? She's 66, but she has held this story for a long, long time. And she's lived a full life. She came to Christ early. She held the secret, though, of what had happened to her. And if you read the book's really, really good and talks a lot more about this. But it wasn't like she held back on some of the story, but she did have people who knew her story. And in the book, it talks about she wasn't the only one in the family that was sexually abused by the dad, as I recall. But she had, the siblings were so tight. And then if you noticed also, the church that she was a part of, there were Sunday school teachers, there were people in her life that truly lived as believers and were there as, like she said, how was it that I believed all of that in spite of what was happening? You can see that God's hand was on her. But anyway, what were we going to say?
Well, and another thing, she could have easily turned away from her faith
Mm-hmm.
when that happened, when she lost her church, and she didn't.
Mhm.
It built up. You know what I mean? Like it
Mhm.
made her faith stronger
Yeah.
to go through that, because she lost a church that she was, talking. I mean,
Mhm.
she was a minister to, and
Yeah.
they turned her back on her almost, and that could easily make you say blame God, and she didn't. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So because we do
Exactly.
that a lot, we want to blame him, but
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that was interesting. She can look back at her life too. And that's what everybody has a story. If you've been abused, if you've gone through any kind of trauma, no matter what kind it is, you have a story, and that story really demands to be told. And being able to look back, and as she's talking about, like she would have been primed to have been groomed, is the word they use now, by a pastor or someone else in her life because of what had happened to her. But she looks back and she talks about seeing God protect her and seeing his work in her life. And so that for her, it sounds like it's been part of the recovery. So when you talk about trauma, like Mike had, defining trauma, and I think it is a very hard thing to define, and the experts disagree on how to define trauma. And that's not so important I think at this point in the context of our conversation about abuse, what's important to understand is that it is more than something that is just distressing at a particular point in time. It's an event that happened at a point in time. You know, it's a fact. It did happen, and events for some of you maybe, for some of us, it was more than one. You know, there were multiple events. But those events, that event was experienced by us in a particular way, by our personality, by within a time and a place. It involves certain people. We had certain thoughts and emotions. It was unique to our experience, and it was experienced. And there were effects on us from that event or events. You can think of, in some ways, it helps to think of, we talked about being designed to heal. When you think about a cut, like I don't know if any of you guys have a cut on you right now, or some kind of wound. I know. I'm like looking at this, I'm thinking, there's still a scar. How many of you, I mean, when you get cut, I'll just use a little wound. When you get cut, what do? You wash it, you maybe put antibiotic on it, and then do you spend every day, of every moment of every day, of every week thinking about that wound until it heals? No. Our body, you would not believe, and if doctors are in here, nurses, they can tell you, all the stuff that's happening is amazing. That wound heals up. The interesting thing that my physical therapist told me when I had something that I had to deal with, he said, okay, Jody, it takes 13 weeks for any wound, for the tissue repair to happen, for all of that stuff. Deeper wounds can take up to 2 years, but there is a process that's taking place no matter what the size of the wound. It takes a certain amount of time. And again, for some wounds, they're going to take a long time because they're so severe. Some wounds become chronic, what you would call chronic, the ones that don't heal up, and there's usually factors at work. It could be the health of the person, the age of the person, things like that. So it is with us. When we go through certain events, for whatever reason, the effects of that event may last longer, okay, and have more impact. And it doesn't mean anything about some people are better than others, nothing like that. Some people are weaker, some people are stronger. It is just the way that it is. And so going back to how we recover, if you think of this as a wound, what is it a wound to? It's a wound to our body, to our mind, to our spirit. There are things going on, and for those of us maybe who have been significantly wounded, there are things going on in our bodies that just drive us nuts when we get triggered. There are things that are, and this is where I need to keep my little, y'all can remind me to keep these going. Okay, and I'm going back there to just Psalm 139. For you formed my inward parts, you made me in my mother's womb. I'm going to give thanks to you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well.
Hey, could you go back for a moment? So
Sure.
3 were the event, experience, and what?
And effects, yeah.
Okay.
So we experience the event occurs. We experience it. The way we experience it is part of the trauma. So the event itself could be considered a traumatic event or be called trauma. The experience is traumatic. And the effect that lingers is also traumatic.
Sure.
There's a difference in experiencing trauma and being traumatized. For people who would maybe fit the definition of traumatized, that would imply maybe they would meet criteria for PTSD, and I won't get into that at this point. The only thing I want you guys to think about is that even someone who's been diagnosed with PTSD, that doesn't mean they're always going to have PTSD. You are not your diagnosis if you've ever gotten a diagnosis. It is describing where you're at in a particular time, what's going on in your life. And I think that's an important distinction because we don't want to get hung up and think that this is the way we are and this is the way that we will always be. Because we're discounting God's grace. We're discounting some of the things that we could be trying that might keep us, get us out of being stuck. So does that answer your question just as far as that part? Okay, so most of the time we do heal and let go. When we go through something traumatic, usually within 3 months, if we allow ourselves to feel everything that we're feeling that's connected to that event, if we allow ourselves to just know that maybe the dreams or the hypervigilant, like the startling and all of the stuff, like being hypersensitive to the stuff around us and not feeling safe. If we understand that that's our body in a healing process, and if we can go with that and let ourselves, again, name what you're feeling, the anger, the sadness, the grief, the fear that occurred, when it comes up, you let it be felt and you talk about it. And again, we'll go into that in just a few minutes. It's going to run its course. What will happen is if you allow, like they call them, like if you have these memories coming up of what happened and you just push them away, you don't want to think about them, just know that's not going to let you get well, okay? And if you push away those emotions and you won't think about them in the time after something happened and you just, it's not going to help you. Because you need that, because you want your brain to be able to record this experience, to take all of the information from that experience and do stuff with it, to process it, to store it away and know that it's no longer happening. So if you can allow yourself to do those very simple things, which are also very, very hard things, you're going to get better. Sometimes, though, it's not so easy. So in someone that's traumatized, what happens is that the amygdala, there's a part of our brain that just gets stuck. And because that memory of what happened is not, I would call it consolidated, it just wasn't encoded the way our normal memories are, then whenever we see something or smell something or hear something or there's a look on somebody's face, and maybe even consciously, we're not thinking, oh, that my boyfriend or my ex-husband or my mother or father, they had that look on their face. Your brain may not even be consciously thinking that, but your body is like, I'm in danger. Does that make sense? And that's our superhero. I will go back to that part of your brain that sends us into that fight or flight. We want that. When we're driving down Adams, how many wrecks have I almost seen on Adams downtown? Somebody slams on their brake, and let's say you're behind that person slamming on their brake. What do?
Slam on the brake too.
You slam on. Do you even think about it? Yeah. Usually you're just like, you act before you even think about it. You swerve, you just do it. And that is that great part of our brain that when there's actually danger, it's doing what it needs to do. But when we've gone through stuff that's traumatic, that part of our brain is like always on fire, it seems like. And so it's going to get us worked up when sometimes there's nothing to get worked out about, okay? When we're in fight or flight, we don't often think very rationally. We don't have to. When we're going into fight, that hyperarousal, the deregulation that's occurring physically, like you're always on, you just are on edge. You cannot, you startle easily. You are just, you're just in a place where it's really hard to be calm. When you're feeling like, when you get triggered by something and you're feeling like it's happening now, that's fight or flight in action, and that's your brain trying to protect you and get you to the place where you can be safe. So physically, again, the deregulation occurs. Maybe you have trouble with sleeping. Oh, Barbara, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say.
Oh, physically, I was going to talk about sleep. Yeah, sleep is also affected. It's not uncommon for people who have gone through a lot of trauma. I mean, if that amygdala, again, is always that part of our brain, whether we've had really hard things happen or not, that part of our brain is always on. When we're sleeping and you wake up because there's a noise or your baby cries, but you're in a deep sleep, it's that part of our brain that kind of wakes us up. And it's there to keep us safe. So anyway, that interferes with sleep though. And it's hard to sleep when you don't feel safe, right? So mentally, you have thoughts and pictures of the trauma that shows up in your dreams, in your nightmares, in flashbacks. Who knows what a flashback is? How would you describe a flashback? It's like where
An incident where something's happened, but then again, you're kind of going through the same. So it's instantly taking you back, and then your fight and flight kind of takes a step
bingo.
without
Yeah.
even realizing
Yeah.
that it's doing it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you are going back and you are in that space and it's happening right then and there. And you can see and you can hear and you can smell, what's going on, that kind of stuff. You definitely feel what you're feeling. There can be a lack of focus and concentration. Maybe it's really hard to think about what happened. And then the other thing about the mental part is the way it changes when we go through trauma, the kinds of beliefs that develop in the aftermath of trauma, as far as like about yourself. Trauma can affect our sense of control in our lives. It can affect how we feel about ourselves, our worthiness. It can affect our sense of safety. It can affect our relationships with others, our relationships even to be comfortable with ourselves, much less somebody else. So with emotions, emotionally is a big deal. Okay, so it's really hard for people who are traumatized to feel pleasure and joy. These emotions can come out of nowhere. And when they come out, they're like here. They're not here. Usually they're out of proportion. Or I would say if you've been traumatized, when you get triggered, your emotions are just over the top. And logically, this is not, I should be feeling anxious here, but you're like here. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. There's also, when someone's been traumatized, numbing and avoidance are big. Like you numb because you don't want to feel. These stinking emotions, they are so unpleasant and we feel them. You guys know, we feel, if you don't know, start noticing. We feel happiness, joy, pleasure, contentment. We feel those in our bodies. But we really notice when we feel stuff like the sadness and the anxiety and what else? Fear, anger. Oh yeah. Like give an example of what you notice about your body when you're angry.
Well, your face gets hot. You start to shake.
Mm-hmm.
Myself, I feel like a blackness inside of me when I get angry, and I just want to lash out.
Yeah, exactly.
Your stomach will hurt, your heart will start racing fast, and you hear ringing.
Exactly. Yeah, all that stuff is going on. Yeah. So just again, knowing a lot of this stuff in the aftermath of going through trauma, you're going to be feeling this stuff, but it eases and goes away. When you are in a place where you've gotten stuck, this stuff is lingering a whole lot longer. Socially is the next area. We talked about that earlier. We pull away from others. We get scared of being triggered. We spend more time alone. We stay away from situations and people. We don't do the things we used to do. And what happens, we feel more and more alone and detached. And we have a fear of people that goes beyond the norm. A lot of us, if we're honest, we would say, yeah, I really like to be liked. I really like for people to approve of me. I don't care what you say. If you say you don't care what people think, I'll say okay. But I would say we all care about that. But when you've been traumatized, oh my gosh, how can you even think about trusting people? But then what you do is you kind of make things harder because you don't let yourself be in situations where you do the things that can help you get better. Okay, spiritually, We feel numb and detached from God. We pull away and we wonder when prayers aren't answered, when all the Bible reading in the world and the small groups and church services, nothing seems to change. We think, does God even care? And so that also plays into it. So getting better. Relationships are the antidote. I was thinking about what do realtors say when you say, okay, what's most important things to consider when you're going to buy a house? Do y'all know? What will they tell you? Right. So what hit me is, okay, relationships. That is most important. Bessel van der Kolk is one of the experts that's written about trauma. And he says that we are profoundly interdependent people. How trauma affects us has a lot to do with the people around us. He asked the question, who is there for you at that particular time? Who was there for you at that particular time? And that those people say, let me help you. Or they just help you even though you don't ask for it or want their help. Norm Wright, another trauma expert, says that the most important element to recovering is to remain connected to other people. It may be the thing that we least want to do, but it's really the thing that's going to get us better. Okay, so reaching out. Don't keep the pain to yourself. Oh, tell me, how hard is it to trust somebody when you've gone through, when you've been abused? It's extremely hard.
It's even harder to trust yourself.
Exactly. That is so true. And that goes back to, it's interesting because it's not just, we think of just not trusting others, but that's a lot of it. We can't even trust ourselves. So this is the tough part. It's like, oh, go ahead, Barbara.
One thing that I have noticed is that a lot of people who have had abuse tend to be around other people who are going to continue to, in one way or another, abuse them. Yeah. It's like they don't know how to reach out to healthy relationships. Mm-hmm. It's just beyond their ability. So they kind of are stuck in a muck and mire because of their environment. They have self-chosen. I don't understand that. Yeah.
Well, that'll be a topic for another day. And it is hard, but there are people who but people do break free when they know that that's a complicated issue. There are reasons for that
I don't think it goes back to them really choosing it. I think it's more of like what do they do, like what they deserve, what they feel like they deserve, or what they feel like they're not unworthy, or they don't. Yes. And that's all they can get, and they'd rather go for something they know than something they don't know, which would be kindness or love or stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think too, we're all traumatized in our head and we don't know what's normal and what's not, and we think that that's normal. We think that that's why we stay there, because we can't. That's normal. That's love or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so we don't know how to get out until we do learn to heal and realize that that's not what it is.
Yeah.
You know?
That what you're saying, what both of you are talking about is so true. And also what we talked about earlier is that when you've been traumatized, you're not always able to think with the same, what would you call it, with the same breadth of thought that you would have if it hadn't been.
A little bit of a distorted view.
Yeah. And your point too is that, again, just the worth issues that come into play. There's a lot of stuff that you're right. There's just a distortion of thinking, and that's very, very common. So learning to trust, thinking of it on a spectrum, and, we learn to trust a little bit at a time. And would you trust any one person with everything? Would you trust somebody? Would you trust your mother to fix your car? Would you tell your mother just about anything? You wouldn't trust her to fix your car. You might not trust her you even watch your kids, but you still might talk to, you know what I mean? Every single person, there are ways to learn how to trust, sometimes a little bit at a time and one person at a time. So finding someone that you think you can be safe enough with, and someone who will listen with what's called empathy. Brene Brown talks about the antidote to shame, and shame is what we often feel. All of us feel it, we just don't name it, and we don't even know we experience it. But I guarantee people who've been abused or have been through trauma struggle with shame and can name it and know how it feels. But the antidote is being able to tell your story to someone who has empathy, not just anybody, right? And so that can be, we can talk about that. Being a person who is that person of empathy, who doesn't try to fix, who doesn't try to tell somebody what to do. That person just needs you to be there. That person needs you to do things for them, whether they can articulate what those things are or not. That person needs you to love them well. And they may have a hard time with it because, like you were talking about, why is this person doing this for me? You know, I don't deserve this. I don't trust them. But those of us who want to minister to people who are traumatized, who have experienced abuse, we do it knowing that this is part of their recovery. Cultivating a group of friends, a community of people who are loving and supportive. The other thing that Beth Moore talked about was therapy. So talking about the reaching out part. There are, I don't know if y'all know much about, you know, as far as therapy goes, if you were looking for a therapist would you go to just anybody when it comes to trauma?
No. You
Okay.
go to somebody that's experienced it probably.
Yeah.
I'm more open to talk to them because they know what it, like they get empathize or sympathize with you because they know how it feels. And they made it up. So.
Yeah, exactly. Do you, like if you were looking, like would you go, let's say, okay, so trauma, if you ever see the words trauma informed or trauma focused, that is maybe an indicator in somebody's bio that they may get it. And then also looking at the training people have had and types of training they've had. There's something called cognitive behavioral therapy. If it's trauma focused, that one's a good route. I can give y'all more information on this since we're running out of time, but there's also cognitive processing therapy, which is specifically, it's been researched the last 20, 30 years for trauma. And right now it's top of the tier as far as what's been validated by the research as being helpful. It's a more structured approach. It is kind of like a CBT, the cognitive behavioral approach, but again, it's been refined to really help people with the beliefs, with teaching people how to experience the emotions that they never experienced that come out of the trauma, with understanding that the way they're thinking about the trauma now is bringing up a lot of emotions that had nothing to do with the trauma, like the shame and the guilt. It addresses the beliefs. So many people that go through stuff like this are saying it's my fault. And that's not true, you know, but those kinds of beliefs are sometimes so stuck in so deep. That particular type of therapy can be very helpful as well. CBT also. And EMDR is something that is also a treatment approach. And if you were going to try that out, that's one that is directed. It's a way of allowing the brain to heal, to process, like if you think of that memory that happened, that is continuing to get triggered and bring up all those strong emotions for you. Think of it as that the brain at that time, because it was so overwhelming, the information, the data from that from that event when it was happening, it did not travel at the same speed. It was traveling on different neural pathways to the brain, traveling at different speeds. It didn't arrive there. And it's interesting to me, but it didn't arrive there at the same time. The brain could not process it in the same way it would have your normal everyday memories. because it was out of the ordinary, and that memory kind of remained in a fragmented state. So when things happen that feel like what happened then, your body and your brain are saying, oh no, it's happening right now, it's getting triggered. EMDR is a means of allowing the brain to basically use a snapshot of the details of the memory. You're not reliving it, you're not retelling anything. It's not talk therapy, but it's a way of allowing the memory, the pieces of the memory, to just kind of come together and be stored. Does that make sense? And so what happens when EMDR is effective, or it does do what it's supposed to do, someone's able to say, you know what, that used to really bother me when that happened. And now I'm not really feeling anything. It doesn't trigger me like it used to. I know that it's not happening now. It happened then. You don't lose the memory of what happened, but you know it's no longer bothering you. So EMDR is another treatment approach. And then there are some other things that are really, really helpful. It helps with addressing the effects of trauma. And then when we go just on to the next one, reaching up. This is talking about your relationship. Talked about relationships with others, whether they're individual, group. I didn't mention group. Oh my gosh, CR. I cannot say enough good things about CR. I cannot say enough good things about small groups. Doing life in community and talking about telling those stories, finding those safe places. And then when you find people who actually get it, right? People who have been there, that can make such a huge, huge difference. So reaching up, praying the Psalms. You guys ever pray the Psalms or take scripture and just read it out loud? Scripture that really, if you go to the Psalms and you see how much in Lamentations, the stuff that expresses the pain of your soul, that's therapeutic in itself. Talking to God honestly, sharing your story. Resilience. Reach up, reach out, reach toward the future. Reach toward the building of resilience. So resilience is the ability to withstand adversity and to bounce back from difficult life events. Being resilient will not mean that you never experience stress. It will not mean that you never get emotionally just and it doesn't mean you won't suffer, but it does mean that you will be able to go with it. You're going to be somebody who's able to work through that pain, that emotional pain and the suffering. When you looked at Beth Moore's story, what contributed to her resilience? What do y'all remember?
She kept fighting.
What's that?
She kept fighting.
Yeah, she kept moving, she kept doing. Yep.
She shared with people she loved.
Mhm.
They kept her strong.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else?
She reminded herself of God's grace.
Yeah, I bet she every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
She was surrounded by strong Christians,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Oh yeah, her whole life.
real Christians.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that, she was talking about seeing her dad prance down the aisle at church. And he was, I don't know if he was a Sunday school teacher. I can't remember. She talked about that in the book. I think she talked more. Nobody knew. But she did. And she was able to see that the faith of the people around her was real. And they ministered to her in a way that told her who God was. And she was able to, would she say Sunday school teachers, her siblings, the church, she has a small group, counselor, her spouse, her husband,
They showed her
Jesus.
truth.
I think you're right. Yep. So these things, I want you guys, these are maybe things to write down on these slides. Building resilience is about making life about the now and the future. And if you just just say, not right now, but maybe after you leave, how would you do that? What would it look like? Maybe it sounds like an abstract idea, but I'm going to flash 4 or 5 screens here, and each one of those, just write these things down, and you, when you leave, think about how would that look in my life today? Commit to a life worth living. What would that look like? What would you do? What would you be doing? How would you be thinking about life? What would you change? Make a gift of your experiences. There's a guy named Donald Meichenbaum, and he's in his 80s now, and he's just a very smart guy, and he's in the mental health field. He's a psychologist, I believe, psychiatrist. And he says that 75%, he's somebody who researched PTSD, for instance, and he said that 75% of people who go through horrific things never develop PTSD. They don't develop chronic PTSD, and he wanted to know what the difference was. And so when he studied the lives of these people, this quality of resilience was evident. And he said that making a gift of your experiences, it's taking what you've been through and turning that into something that benefits others, that helps them, was very important. Look for ways to keep healing. All of us are there. None of us is whole. We are all broken. We talk about that a lot. We are the called and we are broken. And embracing the authenticity of that brokenness and just to keep moving forward in community and in humility toward all that we are to be in Christ Jesus, that's a lifelong process. I love transformation. I love the fact that I'm not going to be the same person at the end of this day that I was when I started it, and that I will not be the same. I thank God I am not who I was, when I was 20, or 30 or 40 or 50 and 60. So it is good that we change. Make community a priority. Also a big deal. So did y'all need that? So I went fast through that last part. I had tons of verses. Well, not tons of verses. Basically, I would encourage you, exhort you as we're closing. We all have a story to tell. Tell that story. Hebrews 12:1. Write down that. I'll just give you these verses to look at. Hebrews 12:1. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. First Peter 5:10. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. 1 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone's in Christ, he's a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all has become new. And Hebrews 10:24 and 25. And then the last one, our ultimate healing is described. Revelation 21:1 through 5. And I love this one. I got to read it. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And he who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. He said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. Yes. Okay. Thank y'all so much. Great to be with you.